And an official good morning to you all. We have a wonderful turnout this morning, and we're so happy to have you all. We've asked you to put into the chat window where you're all from, and we've got people from across the country and even Canada and some other places reaching far and wide. And so we're just thrilled to have everyone here with us this morning. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Barrett. I'm the director here at the Iowa Quilt Museum, and I'm sitting in the gallery with our String Theory exhibit, String Theory, String Pieced Quilts from Past to Present, which was curated by Linzee McCray. She's joining us this morning. We actually have 10 contributors to this exhibit, I believe, including Linzee. And so we have 2 of those with us this morning. Roderick Kiracofe, perhaps is in the upper left-hand portion of your screen, if you're seeing the same that I am. And then Siobhan Ferguson is going to be joining us. She's having a little trouble with her microphone, and so we're trying to get things sorted out for her. But Siobhan's quilt is the one that is over my right shoulder here, the one that she has loaned to us. No?
No.
You're right. I picked the wrong quilt to sit in front of. Darn it.
Whose is it? I know, I love it. It's a favorite of mine.
This is Teddy Pruitt's quilt.
Oh yeah, right.
Goodness sakes, what a gaffe on my part. All right, so I'm gonna move because I really do want to be sitting in front of Siobhan's quilt. I can't sit in front of Roderick's quilts because there are 11 of them. I couldn't choose just one, so I thought I'm gonna choose Siobhan's quilt. So here I go, making a really awkward move over to.
We're seeing some of my quilts in the background, but this is nice. People get to see for the exhibition. Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful space. The museum is just a beautiful, beautiful space. So.
Right.
Okay, here I am. Now I'm sitting in front of Siobhan's quilts.
Yes.
All right, and Linzee, I'm going to turn things over to you for just a second while I reset up this disaster I've just created here. Would you tell us a little bit, start by giving us an overview of why you conceived of this idea, how you put together the quilts that would be selected, and just kind of give us the sense of the exhibit from your standpoint as the curator.
Okay, well, I learned to string piece from someone in my guild probably 15 years ago. I am a quilter, and I just fell in love with the technique. I thought it was so fun. And some people may know I have a book about feed sacks. And one of the things about feed sacks is that draws me to them is the sort of use every little last bit up, that people were not wasting scraps or little bits of fabric. And so part of the reason it's called String Theory, of course, it's a play on words, but my mom passed away a couple of years ago, and she was an amazing, she would call herself a seamstress. She sewed beautifully tailored suits and all kinds of things. She was not a quilter, but she kept, when I was cleaning out her sewing room after she passed away, I realized she had all these little bundles of fabric, and I saw these growing up that she carefully tied with string. And because she was a garment sewer, I undid some as I was cleaning out the sewing room for sentimental value, and they were these long strips of fabric, because if you're laying out a pattern, a clothing pattern, you're going to lay it either on the fold or on the straight of the grain. And what's left are these long strips of fabric, which mostly are too small to be used probably in a traditional quilt block. And so it was like this little aha moment where I said, oh, that's where all these strings came from, is that people were sewing their own clothing and had these pieces left, and there weren't other ways to use them. And one of the things, so I write for a number of places, and Moda Fabrics is one of my clients, and I've written for them for quite a long time, and I get the pleasure of interviewing designers, and one of them is Barbara Brackman. And so every now and then I'll pick Barbara's brain about, these ideas that I have. And she said, yes, indeed, that there were quilt bundles sold in factories, that these strings were used for that purpose. Were bought as a bundle. And we have a quilt in the exhibit by Teddy that, one of Teddy's quilts that is made from scraps from a pajama factory. And she said there, you can even see the labels that say easy on and easy off, I think, or yeah. So when she's here, she can talk to you about that. But anyway, I was drawn in a part for the same reason I'm drawn to feed sacks. I love that sort of idea of the resilience of these people who were using everything up. I also love that, and Roderick was talking about this, that it's a very old technique, and yet contemporary quilters are using it because it's so versatile. There's so many ways that you can use this technique. And so one of my goals in getting the exhibit together was trying to get a wide variety of settings of blocks. I really wanted to show a range of that. There are many more that I wasn't able to get, but I did get quite a few. So that was one of my goals in doing this. And I sourced quilts from, my favorite quilt book of all time, Roderick's book. and I had borrowed, and I think, I'm just drawn to quirky quilts, which I think is another reason why I love string piece quilts so much. But I knew I could call on Roderick because he graciously had loaned quilts when I did a feed sack exhibition. I used, to find contemporary quilters, I used Janine Van Gool's quilted book, which is part of her series that she has. And I also used Instagram. Roderick, you mentioned Instagram earlier, but you look at the hashtags on Instagram and you can find amazing things. Yeah, and I found one of the quilts over your shoulder there, Megan, is Cherie Jimmerson. I found her on Etsy and I ended up buying that quilt. I just loved it. And there were a couple others I wanted her to contribute, but she lives in Florida and was in a bad hurricane and was unable to participate. I just found them and then, people knew I was doing this and they'd say, hey, you might want to look at this. So there are a wide range of places that I sourced the quilts from, but I was really pleased. Thank you, Roderick and Siobhan, for loaning them. The AQS, actually, I found Siobhan's on the AQSG Facebook page. Was one of the way I found hers. So that's kind of the background of the.
Well, and so because we do have so many contributors to this exhibit, we've kind of grouped them together. And the reason that I paired Roderick and Siobhan together is because both of their quilts all of their quilts are historic in nature. And some of our later programs will feature more contemporary quilters and the quilts that they've contributed to the exhibit. So, yeah. So Siobhan, do we have your sound yet? No, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. I sent you a quick little message in the chat. Somebody suggested that if you use your telephone to call in for the sound, there is a dial-in feature. We might be able to hear you with that. So technology is not on our side with that today. I'm so sorry. But you keep working on it. And if we can get you in here, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I alluded to earlier that Roderick has shared 11 quilts with us for this exhibit. And what I'll do so we can see those is I'll pull up some photographs that I've taken. That's better than me trying to take a trip around the gallery. You can see how well that turned out a few moments ago. What you didn't see is that I spilled my water on the floor, and I will have to clean that up when we're finished today. It's not on any quilts. Siobhan, it's not on your quilt, I promise. It is just a big puddle in the middle of the floor. So I'll get that, it's no big deal. So Roderick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be acquainted with quilts and became a collector, and you've got some books published about your collection. So just talk to us a little bit.
Okay, can I ask you a question first before?
Absolutely.
Which is Siobhan's quilt? Is it over your right shoulder?
This one.
Yeah.
Okay, and what, it's a recently made quilt, right?
No.
It is, circa 1930s. And according to the, I'll just read you the description because I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she purchased this in the Southwest United States. Maker is unknown. Cotton strips pieced onto a plain muslin backing create strings of hexagons. The backing fabric includes a Robin Hood flour sack and 3 best flour sacks from Yukon, Oklahoma. The batting is cotton and is quilted with an all-over Baptist fan design. And it says that Siobhan's interest in string piecing came after taking a workshop with renowned teacher and quilter Gwen Marston.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 1930s is where we're estimating the top to, well, the whole quilt to be. Some of Teddy Pruitt's quilts in this exhibit are vintage tops that she has finished herself. But that's not the case with this one, is it, Siobhan?
Okay, the reason I ask is because I have one very, very similar to it. Hers is more colorful. Mine's a little bit somewhat faded, but I think the original coloring wasn't quite as bright. It was not in Unconventional and Unexpected, but I posted it recently on Instagram and got so many responses to it. And as has happened over the years, when I've posted quilts on Instagram, a lot of contemporary quilt makers start doing I think it's called a quilt along. Sujata Shah, whose work is in the show and is a wonderful, wonderful quilt maker, lives in California now. I believe she's the one that then took the vintage quilt that I posted of this. I was calling it, to me, it looks like gumballs, like in a jar full of gumballs. And so she said, I'm going to make that quilt or do my rendition of it. And then quite a few other people were doing the same. And it's been really, really fun to see that. Unconventional and Unexpected, I've been told by many, many people, is such an inspiration book to them, that they see these quilts that were made primarily in the last half of the 20th century and just get inspired by them and want to do something similar. So I'm sorry, we got off, but I just was so curious because I wasn't sure if that was one that had been made recently but Siobhan, it's beautiful. I love it. So I always try to make this story fast as possible, but Midwesterner, had a grandmother that sewed. I never saw her making quilts. I was interested in, quote, old things, started going to farm auctions and household auctions just because I was curious about the things that people had and lived with and used, often being handmade. So this was in the 60s that I was doing that. Never saw a quilt in Northern Indiana. Learned later from a lot of the auctioneers was that at that time, bedding, sheets, towels, quilts, old blankets were taken to the dump. No one was interested in buying them. I think they were considered, ooh, people slept under them, they're not sanitary, so they went to the dump. So, I mean, it's a pretty horrifying thing. But I started collecting quilts in Southwest Ohio just because, again, I was intrigued by them. The first quilts that I ever saw, I saw in California when I moved to California in the early 70s. So it was quite interesting to me that I get introduced to quilts in California, having grown up in the Midwest. But returned to the Midwest, started going to auctions again. And by this time, mid 70s, we've got the bicentennial has happened. Quilt making is just exploding. Quilt collecting is exploding. I meet Michael Kyle. He had grown up with quilts. He had quilts on his wall that were made by his grandmother and other family members. kind of like deciding, well, let's open a lemonade stand. I said, let's start a quilt business. Already there were many quilt businesses happening, primarily in New York, or the larger cities had the big galleries, but lots of local dealers, lots of interest in quilts. Michael and I moved to California in 1978 with the back seat, drove across country, back seat full of quilts, and just fell into a very warm and receiving audience in all over California. And then we started advertising in the Clarion magazine, which was the magazine for Museum of American Folk Art in New York, and just built a business and established a business of buying and selling quilts. We looked around the landscape and looked at the quilt publications that were happening, and they were all coming out of New York. E.P. Dutton was the publisher, Cy Nelson, who was a major collector of American folk art and really promoted it. But all of the books about folk art and quilts were in New York collectors, East Coast collectors. And we also saw that there were the contemporary quilt magazines, Quilter's Newsletter and others, but we decided to join the two, the contemporary quilt worlds with the antique quilt world, and we started a publication called the Quilt Digest. Had very well researched and written articles in them. I got to curate an exhibition each year of antique and contemporary quilts that I really loved. And it was a very new thing on the scene, and again, got a lot of attention. One thing, when Michael and I started the business, we decided that we were not going to collect quilts. We didn't want people to feel like we've skimmed off the cream and everyone else gets, what we didn't want. So we made that very clear from the beginning that we were not going to collect. We were going to offer whatever we found that would be available to those that were interested in them. We helped build a number of really important collections in the country and was familiar with many of those collectors. Again, I had the wonderful opportunity to write The American Quilt with Mary Elizabeth Johnson as my writer, who wrote an incredible text. But again, I got to pick quilts from, I had my pick of quilts from all over the country, but I really did an emphasis on trying to find as many California and non-New York collections, just to show a balance of what was happening. I arranged the book in historical time periods rather than by pattern or style that other books had been done, just because I like that linear progression of here's where we started and things progressed and changed and new patterns came in and new styles and interests and all of that. After the American Quilt and Cloth and Comfort which was a little gift book that we put out the following year that had quotes from letters and diaries of kind of just firsthand information from women about sewing, whether it was family clothes or quilts or just sewing in general. I was fascinated by that history and the women who were actually making them and what they had to say about them. And then I got to a place where I just thought, well, I've said everything that I need to say about quilts. There was nothing. Originally, I had thought that I would do a contemporary book. The American quilt ended at 1950. I had an idea for doing a 1950 to the 20th century about contemporary quilts, but that project just wasn't coming together like I had hoped and wanted. But I thought, and I also just I realized I needed to go make some money. I needed to get a job. So I started doing something completely different and just stepped away from the quilt world. And maybe I should stop here and let you ask another question because I can go on and on.
Well, why don't we take this moment to kind of transition to, I'm going to do a screen share and we'll start looking at some of a closer up view of the quilts that are in this exhibit. Are you seeing a picture of Siobhan's quilt now?
I am, yes. That's a beautiful, wonderful quilt.
It is. And now you can see the whole thing, not just the little bit that's in my screen. I'm still not sure that we have sound from Siobhan.
Do we?
I don't think so. So let's go on to Roderick's quilt.
I don't want to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yay!
Oh, hi, Siobhan.
We made it work.
I apologize so much. I'm having work done on the house. It's emergency. So I had to move to the other side of the house and use a laptop. It worked okay when I tested it this morning. And then, of course, when I sign in with y'all, it just decided not to do it.
Yes, that is the story of my life, Siobhan. It worked when I tested it, I swear.
So I've never done the phone with Zoom before, though, so I learned something. That's good.
Yes. And I don't have her name in the chat window right now who helped us do that, but thank you to our viewer who helped us make that.
The joys of live Zoom.
I know. I apologize. I'm on the side of the house with the dogs.
Siobhan, where are you? Where do you live? I forget.
Well, I just moved fairly recently to Florida from Georgia. I was in Augusta, Georgia. And that's why you were thinking I have a lot of Southern quilts because I was in Georgia for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And so that's where I got really interested in I have a lot of quilts that came from people that were working in the textile mills around South Carolina and that area. And that's where I got really interested in string quilts. That was a big part of it. Now I'm living in a town called Mount Dora, Florida, which normally it would not be a big emergency if your furnace went out, except that we're under frost advisories for the next 2 nights. So it's real important that furnace gets fixed on the other side of the house. Yes. Though I have a lot of quilts, so I'm okay.
Right.
Did
you hear me talking about that I have a quilt like this? Only yours is bad.
I went through a phase where it may have been, I've had this quilt for probably 10, 15 years, but I went through a phase where I was really excited about hexagon quilts and southern quilts. And so I have like 4 string quilts done in hexes. The quilt I think that you're thinking of me from was actually a spider web quilt that you had. I believe it was either a spider web or a sort of a wonky wedding ring. And I use the colors. I use a lot of my antique quilts to inspire new quilts. So I sort of go between being a quilt collector and I make quilts as well.
Yeah.
And there was one that I used, I think it was a wedding ring, because then I used the colors from it to do a string quilt that was a spider web.
Okay.
And I sort of merged a quilt that I had with the colors from yours and made yet a third quilt.
Great.
Which is what I do a lot. Yeah.
Love-
And then I accidentally started to make a copy of one of your quilts. And I contacted you afterwards because I had seen it online and I must have loved it, because then a week later I'm playing in the sewing room and I'm making a quilt. The next morning I come in and I said, oh my gosh, I've gone and made a copy of one of Rod's quilts and I didn't even mean to. And I contacted you and you said as long as I put credit that it came from your collection, that was fine, which was very generous of you. But I think that's sometimes the danger of so much media that we see. We're seeing so many quilts that when you sit down, sometimes you think it's your own idea, but it's really something that you've seen. And I think that's sometimes a danger, that we're doing derivative work without even meaning to do it.
Well, I believe that those ideas are just out there in the ether. Because as I started collecting the group that was in Unconventional Unexpected, I was looking at them and seeing similarities to a lot of modern and contemporary art, which just fascinated me. And I mean, I know that there were modern artists that did collect quilts and had them, and I think were inspired by them. No one ever really talked a lot about that, but there were just ideas that were happening at the same time. Why was a quilt maker in Georgia or Alabama or California doing something that some painter was doing in New York or in some other place? I just think those ideas people see pattern, shapes, colors, and start playing with them. And it's exciting now to me that so much of this, quote, women's work is being appreciated, collected, written about, exalted, as it should be, that it isn't something lesser than a painting or a sculpture. So yeah, but I think you're right. We see things, we're inspired by them, and all of a sudden we're making it, and then oh gee, that looks similar to, or I was inspired by. And yeah, I love that happens.
Lindsay, you have something you say about, quote, women's work that I really like. And I'm going to misquote you, and then hopefully it'll trigger your memory. About how wonderful it is that even in clothing making and other textiles, that it's a very necessary job, and yet women took the time to make it beautiful, to embroider a flower here on her little girl's skirt. Do you know what it is that you say that I'm kind of referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I say that, about feed sacks, where I've interviewed so many people who live just these hard lives with no modern appliances. And, the women that were like raising the chickens and cutting their heads off and cooking them and raising the children and all of it, and they still took time to do those things. And I think there's a, I don't know if there's an inherent need for beauty, but I think there's an appreciation. You take your flowers from your garden and you put them in a milk bottle and you stick them on the windowsill. There's always that desire to make, and especially to make everyday life. I think that's so much of what quilts do, and pieces of clothing, that sort of thing. They make your everyday life so much more beautiful, or they can.
Right.
Elevate a moment in your life. So
I'm looking at the clock, and I'm going to go ahead and move us on. Siobhan, is there anything specific you wanted to say about this quilt now that we've got your audio?
No, I think we've covered. I just, of the string hexagons I had, this one, because it has a little bit of negative space in there, I think it allows you to appreciate the work that went into the hexagons themselves. And I like that with string quilts that aren't so busy that you can actually see some definition.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, obviously these hexagons could have been pieced together, but that created almost something that was just too much for the eye to absorb in a lot of ways.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so now we do have several of Roderick's quilts, and if you have something specific to say about any given quilt, Roderick, please feel free to do so. It's also okay with me if we just enjoy it for a few moments and then move on to the next. So you get to kind of drive the next few minutes, Roderick.
Okay, tell me what are we going till 11?
Yes, we are shooting for an hour, which would be 11 o'clock your time. Now we don't have to end right at that moment, but that's,
okay.
that's our goal.
Okay, I will try to keep things pithy, but just I took time away from the quilt world, and then I literally woke up one morning and thought, I am really curious about what kind of quilts were being made, like from the 1950s on, because the common belief among quilt historians was that quilt making essentially stopped at World War II, not to be picked back up again until, you know, a few early pioneers, Jean Ray Laurie making quilts in the 1960s, but then just the explosion of interest in making quilts and quilt guilds and quilt magazines and everything that happened in the 70s, and we're still experiencing that today. And eBay was a new thing then. I was curious about that. I knew several dealer friends were buying and selling on eBay, and there was kind of a new generation of young dealers going there. So I thought, I'm going to look at this and just see it and look for things that appeal to my eye. And, you know, maybe I am forming a collection, or maybe I'm spending a month or two and then deciding nothing's happening. But I went in looking for quilts, again, that to me had just a strong visual impact. And I love printed fabric. And so I was looking for quilts that just kind of like prints next to prints, next to prints, next to prints, where again, kind of breaking the rules of people being taught, oh, well, no, you don't want to put too many prints together and all of that. But the more the merrier to me. There were a number of themes that started appearing that I really liked and were collecting. I look at this and just see the big X's on the face of the quilt, not necessarily individual blocks. Then I look at that right side with all the red in it and think, like, well, that's pretty wonderful. And why did she do that? We don't know. Red was definitely, when a quilt had some red in it, and usually it was solid red, that was often just kind of the final thing that go, yes, this is one that I want. So we'll see, I think, some more that have the grid in them, and that was fascinating, particularly when the grid got broken. It wasn't this, again, traditional way of doing a grid. Yeah, so here, another theme kind of was the cross. I don't think the maker necessarily was making it as a cross, but just, I got fascinated by that shape. Sometimes people refer to it as a plus sign, but here the grid is so large and present, and the string piecing, in the string blocks are in more of the background, which I like. It's got some great red in it, so this was a keeper.
This one checked all the boxes, huh?
Yes, yes.
You
What
know,
else?
Roderick, where you got that one?
You've got, you have the captions, you know more. Not right offhand, I don't. And again, here's another kind of lattice type where the grid is turned on turn 90 degrees and it forms a lattice. Again, one can look at it and kind of see the X's that happen in this, the movement of these plaids. I'm think this might have come from Tennessee, if I'm remembering correctly, and from an area that had a shirting fabric mill.
That would make sense, yeah.
Yeah, so this was a lot of shirting fabrics. Many of the quilts, maker is unknown. It was a big surprise to me when I would ask people, well, do you know who made it? And they would say, well, why do you want to know that? And this, this was in the early 2000s that I'm starting to buy these, and most every state in the country had done a quilt search day. I was involved with the California Heritage Quilt Project search, where we went around and documented quilts from all over the state, produced a book and an exhibition, but just so much interest in who was the maker and keeping that information available. So I just learned that Anonymous was still alive and well. And I just decided, well, I'm not going to find out every maker. Some quilts did come with, well, it was possibly made by, or the dealer said, well, it was made by this woman. I said, well, do you have any documentation? No. I've since I've tried to do quite a bit of genealogy research, and I've had some wonderful people help with that. And we have been able to put makers to a quilt and identify them from that area. Often quilts, because it looked a certain way, it was more improvisational or quirky. Oh, well, it's an African-American made quilt. Like, well, now, do you know that for a fact? Well, no, it just looks like one. Well, we can't just say because a quilt looks like something that a known African-American maker made, that might be. But so I've been able to identify some of those things. I love the movement in this, and a lot of the quilts that I have do have a lot of movement in it. I just see, Siobhan was saying there's more negative space here to allow to see kind of what's going on, and it's not so, every one of those blocks isn't string pieced. You've got some blank blocks, which I'm quilt makers, sorry, I don't know the terms of those blank blocks, but here I just, what?
I said just plain, that's all I would say.
Plain.
Yeah.
But I just see like the white fabrics, I just kind of, and many of the others, I just see it as though it's falling through. I really do tend to look at the quilts kind of as this overall picture, versus looking at particular technique or anything like that. But again, it appealed to me. The grays in it, unusual, a little more subtle.
Can I say this quilt for me sort of pushed the idea of what is string piecing?
Yes.
Because a lot of these blocks are not particularly strings.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the interesting things to think about what is string piecing, is the real definition of it, And so this one was sort of like, well, is it, isn't it? We obviously said yes, but.
Well, when Linzee, when you asked me, do you have any string quilts? I'm doing this exhibition. It was kind of a surprise to me to go through and think, oh yeah, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. I think I sent you about 15 to 20. I mean, it just kind of surprised me to go look back on, oh yeah, there are a lot, and there's so much variation in them. And that's what I like too about how you picked what I sent you as possibilities. There's just unlimited variations that can happen.
There are.
It's
Okay.
interesting to hear you say that, Lindsay, because when I looked at this one, you know, compared to the others that came from the collection, I thought, gosh, she was really pushing the envelope here on this one about what we're defining as string quilts.
Yeah.
You know, and in comparison to others, it's not nearly as strippy, we might say, kind of in current vernacular, but it's obviously a you know, a beautiful quilt and is an example of string piece construction.
And I'm all about pushing the envelope, which I think it's important that we don't just get so with blinders on and defined by certain things. And clearly in that one that we just passed, you know, she was using up pieces of fabric that were around and using it. This is sort of a string strip. Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
We're a little delayed here.
I love the arrangement of this and these long strips. They are, you know, in blocks. They're more of a rectangular block, but then again, just putting one next to the other and next to the other, next to the other. Her two sides. Now I think this does have a frame all the way around, very narrow border all the way around that again, got pieced with varying fabrics. It wasn't all one fabric that she decided to frame it with. She just, again, using up pieces of fabric that she's got. I think up in the upper right corner is, I think they're dogs or puppies, a puppy fabric.
Yeah, I think here's one right here that I'm kind of circling with my mouse.
Can you go up to the upper right corner and zero in a little bit on that border?
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah, there you can see it in the middle there. Whoops.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Rod, what I love about this one is it has almost a curve feeling when you look right at it.
Yes.
So it's sometimes hard to define the blocks because there's so many different angles.
Yeah.
Right. It was actually kind of someone else that looked at the quilts and just said to me, there's so much movement in your quilts. And I hadn't quite really noticed, or I think I'd noticed, I just hadn't defined it in a way. But then after they said it, I realized, yeah, there's just so much movement happening in so many of these that.
Another thing you said about so many fabrics in here that I enjoy when I make a string piece quilt is looking at my fabrics. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that quilt. Oh, I remember I made this with that one, you know, that you can look back at those little strips. And if you're a fabric person, which I think we all are here, that you, those memories, you know, of what that fabric, what you used it for. So I love that about when I make a string piece quilt.
So this was just a fun, snaky quilt, but then realizing, and there are several quilts in Unconventional, Unexpected that use a circle or half circle, and basically, and again, like I start getting into trouble not being a maker of how she made these blocks, and then by the way she placed them, either created this green snake going through, but on the outer borders, you've got just these half circles.
Mostly.
But I think the block was, let's see. I mean, it's almost like a bow tie if you take one block and have the half circles, but again, depending on how she placed them, you get this whole variety. I think she could have done it in a way that there would have just been green circles all across, but this is a much more dynamic, again, kind of the movement. And again, here was where the red was kind of a clincher. Just these wonderful, many of these are printed, red printed fabrics. Can you go in, I'm up towards the top right corner. There are two pieces of red fabric that
They look like they're vibrating.
yes, yes. Okay, yeah, it's the print. It's the print of it that they do look like they're vibrating.
And somebody asked, Rod, this is a pieced quilt, not an applique quilt, right?
It is pieced, yes, but it's also a string quilt, or it's a tied quilt. It's a comforter. Yes, the green is not appliqued on top of the blocks. It's part of each block.
Amazing.
A little bit Drunkard's Path-esque in that regard.
Yes, yeah.
Pieces out and putting them together in different ways.
Right.
Yeah, it's really catching people's eyes when they're here in the gallery to see that. It's one that people are really being drawn to.
Oh, great. That I love to hear and see what people respond to. This is a very humble quilt. It's been used. It's very thin. I think maybe very little bat in it. Okay, here's one that fell into the category of broken grids. I basically had never really seen a grid being broken before until I started this search and started acquiring these quilts. And I just started seeing kind of more and more and more of them. And I just think they're fantastic. Again, it's kind of not worried about everything lining up. It fits the way it fits. I don't know, just what else to say other than I just love it and think it's such a fantastic piece. And the movement in it, again, you can see my reds in it, but it's all about that broken grid.
This one has such great fabrics in it too. It's just a lot of fun, you know. And there are some. I think there are some quilts we appreciate for their design. Some quilts we appreciate for their craftsmanship, and there are some quilts we appreciate for the variety of fabric selections in them and how, you know, it's like hunting through a box of, I don't know, a box of rocks or something and kind of picking out the cool ones for their different values. And then of course, some quilts like Bonnie Hunter's, we can appreciate for all of those things.
I think I just saw a comment or question asking about the broken grid. So I'm assuming everyone understands, you know, the grid formation of many quilts. So the grid is the white or the cream color in between the blocks. Again, there's a term for that.
Sashing.
Sashing, yeah.
There you go.
I can never. So broken sashing, I guess. But again, as I view it from a whole, that sashing usually forms this very precise 90-degree angle grid to it. This one doesn't. And again, others in my collection, the same thing. It's just this wonderful, again, no one was trying to be perfect and get everything to match up.
Right. Because the block does not start with the sashing or the white part. The block starts from the middle of the color and goes to the middle of the color and the middle of the color and the middle of the color. So the reason it's broken is because she wasn't terribly precise.
Right, right.
Which I can totally understand myself. I guarantee you. But it's
And some people would think, oh, well, this, I didn't do a very good job, you know, put it aside, don't finish it, I won't use it, or people don't like it. I have quirky tastes, I guess, but a lot of people have responded to showing a type of quilt, again, in unconventional, unexpected, that generally tended to get overlooked. It wouldn't make it into a contemporary quilt exhibition because it wasn't made perfectly. Or it's looking at somebody, a maker that just did it in a different way. And to me, it's a beautiful way.
Well, she has a great eye for color, though, because the red is scattered so evenly across. It doesn't focus your eye on any one spot, which is.
And then her striped fabric, the way she placed the striped fabric is just kind of brilliant.
And although it's a lot of different fabrics, there is a cohesiveness, like that pink kind of through everything, you know, it kind of hold it together. And
if she ended up being displeased with this quilt because she wanted it to be precise and it wasn't, I wish we could share with her how much we are all loving and appreciating this quilt.
Right, right.
And I think that that's an important message in itself, you know, in all areas of life, you know, that perfection is sometimes highly overrated.
Well, and I've gotten that feedback over the years of people that you know, have shown the book to older quilt makers. Now,
that was me with the group.
Okay, I was going to say, I thought that was you, Siobhan. I used to be on Facebook more, and so we had much more conversation. And I thought it was you. Well, you tell the story, please, because it just thrilled me.
Well, it was. I was volunteering putting computers into rural areas of South Carolina, and I had one church that I went to, and it was one of these where you turned left down a dirt road and you kept going till you were sure you were nowhere. And then you were at this church. And I walked in and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get across to these people, how, you know, important getting onto the internet is. And we were setting up 2 computers in their church in the back room. And it just happened that day they were quilting. And Rod had put his book out, or at least part of it on, it was Facebook or it was on the blog. I don't remember, but I had a few pages.
Workbooks. I did a couple of workbooks, and you had a copy of it online.
That's it. And so one of the women who was working on sort of a string quilt came over, and I was talking about, you know, oh, you can go onto the internet, and she wasn't buying it until I showed her the write-up that Rod had about a string quilt that looked similar to ones they were working on. And she was touching the screen, and she said, I knew they were pretty, but I didn't have the pretty words. And I was a mess. And she got everybody taking the computer class.
Well, I also remember you saying something about whether it was her or another person, my children don't like the quilts that I make. And here's somebody that appreciates them. And I mean, there are other people that appreciate these quilts. I love that story, and I often use it when I give a talk, because it just says so much about what I was doing. And a lot of what I was doing, I had no idea what I was doing. I just was following an interest, following a curiosity, and following my passion and following my eye of what I find beautiful. And so This is a wonderful string star. I got this from a dealer in Ohio, Mark French. And this actually kind of falls before, I don't have I think the date of this is kind of the 20s to the 30s.
10 to 1940 is what we have on our description.
What did I put?
1910 to 1940.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is kind of comes before my 1950, but I also am a believer, things like this didn't start happening in 1950 and on. It was happening before. And I wanted to show good, wonderful examples of kind of what came before. Besides it being a really beautiful quilt to me and not quite as quirky or unusual, but I mean, this is very precisely made. And the thing that was, one of the things that was so exciting about it when it arrived, it's got a very thin bat, and it had a feel to it of like the kinds of quilts that Michael, Kyle, and I were buying in the late 70s, early 80s, back in the Midwest and other places of just these thin, crisp, beautiful binding, beautifully pieced. This has a solid muslin back, which most of the quilts in the collection do not. They were pieced backs, but this just took me back to my dealer days of kind of just these perfect quilts that were out there and available to buy and then sell to collectors. But again, the string stars to me are just wonderful. I've always loved indigo blue fabrics and the varieties of blue. This binding and the grid or the sashing in this is this wonderful, probably a morning print, the gray, small gray print, gray and white printed fabric. But then particularly the 3 blocks where she used the darker indigo blue and just how that highlights those stars.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? Do we need to shut me up? Oh. They just get better and better. You know, again, the maker, the mind of this maker, what I see is her artistic ability, placing fabric, the colors, prints, and the solids. This has, you know, kind of a good amount of solid fabrics to it, but then the prints in it are just wonderful. I think kind of circa 60s, 70s kinds of prints in there. The plaids, that blue and yellow plaid that she uses. Again, I liked quilts and had a number of where they just are these very bold, strong strips in them. To me, again, that they come forward more and the string blocks go into the background. But
I think, Rod, one thing you said that I think kind of for me applies to all string quilts is sort of the mind of the maker. I feel like for some reason in string quilts, and not just string quilts, but in unconventional and unexpected, those kind of quilts, you just see the mind of the maker in a way that you don't necessarily, the mind and the hand of the maker.
yes, yeah.
In a way that you don't necessarily in a lot of kinds of quilts. And I think that's one thing that draws me to them so much. I love that.
Yeah. It's just, you know, again, there's, whether or not we consider or look at quilts as paintings, I kind of fall on both sides of it, but I really do look at them in that way, and have from the very beginning. There's always been two major themes for me that has motivated loving fabric and knowing that somebody did this by hand, usually a woman. That was the first quilt that I saw in California. The second quilt I saw was hung on a wall. It was a unfinished log cabin quilt top that this friend had bought at a sidewalk sale, house sale. She couldn't remember if she paid $5 or $10 for it, but she had it hanging on her wall. This was in 1974 as a piece of art. And I just stood in front of it and was kind of dumbstruck by it and realized, my gosh, yes, it totally is. So I've always carried both of those, what's the right word, feelings about quilts with me from the very beginning. In putting together this collection, I leaned more, my leaning was more towards the art of them, seeing them as objects of art, seeing them on a wall of a gallery or a museum, equal to, in some cases not better than paintings. But then being reminded at the same time, these were on beds. Most of these quilts, I know, they weren't the precious quilts that got folded up and put away in a cedar chest. These came off of beds. They were used, and there's just something about both of those happening that I marvel at. I think those are black, not a dark blue. So you don't see a lot of black in quilts, but in some ways the black was kind of the red for me. The orange that's happening too, again, just like pulls it all together. Again, lots of prints next to prints next to prints. It checked off that box.
Well, and there is the solid piece, the solid block, but it's certainly not plain in this case.
Right.
But I do think that helps give it kind of that overall, it pulls it together, gives it some kind of sense of cohesion. It's interesting to me, though, how all of the black or the darkness, or most of it anyway, is on the right-hand side.
Yes.
A tiny bit in that lower left-hand corner, but the orange is fairly well spread out. So, one wonders if she started in one area and then realized she was short on fabric and pulled out some others, and
Right. It just,
I like to speculate.
Yeah, the mysteries that all of them hold when we don't have the maker there to ask that question.
Right. So here's my plug to all of you out there who are actual quilt makers. Please document your quilts.
Yes.
At the very least, put your name and the date on the back. What's even greater is to put a whole story on the label and stick it on the back. Because as museums, we have all of these quilts, and collectors and appraisers. We come across quilts all the time, and we just so desperately want to know the stories behind them.
Right.
And the makers of these quilts did not think that their quilts would be of any significance.
No.
And yet here they are. And so don't delude yourself into thinking that your quilts will not have significance someday to somebody somewhere.
Right.
Okay, I'll put my soapbox away.
No, thank you. Thank you very much that's a message that just needs to be given over and over and over again.
I think this is the last one in your batch, Roderick.
Okay.
Good.
I liked quilts where, sometimes I would find a quilt that the maker was starting with kind of a known pattern. And then for whatever reason, it just veered off. She veered off into a whole new direction. Again, kind of the mystery of that. I think here, these blocks were leftover blocks that she decided, hey, let's put these in here. Excuse me. It's always fun with this quilt. I show it vertically, horizontally. It takes on, kind of different looks each way. This is wonderful. And again, it's just like the movement of flowing down from the top and just kind of zigzagging. It's almost a chevron effect, but there's just this movement of color and it flowing down to the bottom. Possibly that the pieced blocks and the board at the top was at the top of the bed, but again, we don't know. But
Yeah.
it's fun, the combination that she did with this one.
This one almost looks in the very bottom, whoops, in the middle of that one. It almost looks like it was patched, like there was a patch on it. Oh, but anyway, see in the middle block and the bottom row, it looks like there's a patch that's not a string.
Can we close up? And again, I invariably, or somebody, find something in a quilt that I think I've seen, multiple times and have seen everything in it. And then like now, oh, there's a patch, which I never noticed before. Which again, it's just like, you think you can know everything about a quilt and then it reveals something else that's really just so fun.
Yeah. Megan, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Lindsay. We've started construction in the Quilt Museum today, so there's a significant amount of background noise. So I'm trying to cut that down for you.
Wow.
There's been so much wonderful conversation today, and I'm going to kind of close things up because we have pushed our hour time, and I want to respect everyone's joining us today. But thank you so much to Roderick and to Siobhan and to Lindsay for joining us today. We can give them an online applause, or there's actually a little clap your hands button somewhere in there. I don't know how to use that, but Lindsay will be joining us again, I hope, for some other programs featuring other contributors to this exhibit. And of course, Roderick and Siobhan, you're welcome to join us anytime. A couple of things before we close. If you learned of this program, but not from the Iowa Quilt Museum, then you need to join our mailing list. And to do that, you just go to our website, which is iowaquiltmuseum.org. And you pop up in the upper right-hand corner and it says, or it's maybe in the middle of the homepage, it's really obvious. And it just says, join our mailing list. And enter your information and then you'll learn about all of these programs. We're doing this every Tuesday at 12 Central Time. Next week, we won't be talking specifically about the exhibit, but it will be another wonderfully Iowa quilt related topic. And then the week after that, we'll be revisiting the exhibit again. The idea of this program is more conversational. And so if you're looking for an actual gallery walk through the exhibit where you basically just see the quilts and hear the descriptions, we are working on that. I am editing the video today. It's one of my projects. And we will be selling that for a donation of $6, which is admission to the museum. And so you want to join the mailing list so you can find out how to purchase that as well. And that will be just the quilts and their descriptions you can look at your leisure. And the last thing that I would say to you is if you are enjoying this programming and the fact that we are putting so much effort into creating virtual programming for you and are willing to make a monetary donation, we would be very grateful for that. Again, you just pop onto our website, which I'm going to put in the chat again. because lots of others of you are chatting about wonderful things. And there's a button where you can make a secure online donation. And we're not expecting hundreds of dollars by any means, but whatever you feel comfortable with making a donation in appreciation, we are grateful for. You can even set up a recurring donation if you so choose. I think that covers all of that. I do hope to see you again next Tuesday at 12. Linzee or Siobhan or Roderick, any closing comments from you?
I just wanted to say thank you to all the people that attended. It was wonderful to have such a great audience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It really was. Yes, very good.
So.
Siobhan, ladies first.
Oh, I just wanted to say I think it was fun to have something like string quilts actually getting recognition, because I see so many of them in the South and people sort of discount them a bit, and I love seeing so many of them used in modern quilting as well. So I think it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And we can absolutely thank Linzee for that. We decided it was probably 2 years ago that Linzee proposed this exhibit idea to us. This is actually the third exhibit that Linzee has curated for us. And that reminds me, I'm sorry, Roderick, I will give you a chance to make closing remarks, I promise. But I forgot that I wanted to say a little bit more about Linzee, because in addition to being a curator, she is a fantastic fabric designer, and among other things, including a wonderful journalist and, just a really fun person to be around. And I have in my hands a fat quarter bundle that Linzee was able to secure for us of her brand new fabric line. Is this your fourth? Third?
I'm not sure if that's my third or my fourth, but yeah.
This is Flowers for Freya.
And a brand new one. Yeah, fourth.
Right, and Freya is your granddaughter, is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
This is my, I've loved all of Linzee's fabric lines, but this one's my favorite. But this is a fat quarter bundle that's not even available for purchase yet, of 31 of these fabrics, and we are raffling it through the end of the month. So you need to go to our online store and purchase your raffle ticket for $2, and for $2 or 10 or 20, depending on how many you purchase, you could be the brand new owner of this fantastic fat quarter bundle. And there's also a link to our online store from our website. So there is my shameless plug for Linzee and her fabulous fabric. And because Linzee secured this as a donation, all of the proceeds from this raffle will go to the Iowa Quilt Museum. So somebody's going to get a bundle of fabric for $2, and the rest of you are going to be really generous donors to the Iowa Quilt Museum. So everybody wins. All right.
Linzee, thank you for curating the show and inviting me to participate in it. It was really fun. Megan, you've done a great job of installing and moderating this event today. Siobhan, it was really wonderful to see you again. Just not so much on Facebook. Join me on Instagram. And I'll do just some shameless promotion. Linzee, you showed it. Unfortunately, Unconventional and Unexpected is out of print. It was a really, really disappointment to me that happened. However, there's something in the works. I'm not at liberty yet to announce it officially, but it's not dead. Unfortunately, online, the most recent price I heard was $700, which is crazy. I don't get any of that. But most public libraries have a copy of it, so it is available to borrow from the public library. One can kind of just keep an eye online or eBay or whatever to see if it's priced less than that, but something is going to happen with it, that it's going to be available again with some exciting additions.
And I just want to say, Roderick, not only is it a gorgeous, beautiful book, but the essays are fantastic.
Yes.
They're fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Definitely. I was really thrilled with the 10 people that
Mhm.
said that they would love to participate in this and gave these different looks and viewpoints on them. Yeah, they really are wonderful. So it's a project that I am very, very happy and pleased to have been able to do. So, and again, I really enjoyed being here today. I know I can be a talker. So.
Well, that's a good quality when you're having an interview. So,
but sometimes there has to be, okay. But no, it's great fun. Always in person is more fun, but it's really wonderful that Zoom has allowed
yes.
us to be able to gather like this and have people from all over the country and maybe outside of the country
Right.
get to
Yes.
participate. So
that's one of the wonderful things about this is we've been able to expand our outreach
Right.
exponentially from what we would be able to do in person. However, we are open for in-person visits. We're open 7 days a week, 10 to 4 Monday through Saturday, and 12 to 4 on Sundays. And because of our wide open spaces and because visitorship is quite low right now, we do consider this to be a fairly safe place to visit. We do encourage the wearing of masks. We have some contact-less options for purchases and such. So if you're in the area, if you're going to be in the area between now and March 21st, we do encourage you to come in person because no amount of showing these quilts in photographs just does justice. So, but to our friend who's just chatted in from England, probably you won't get to come visit in person. So we're glad we get to reach you online instead. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a
Megan.
wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you again next Tuesday at 12. Bye. Bye, Sean.
Thanks, Megan.
I hope the furnace gets fixed.
Yeah.
Oh, you and me both.
Stay warm. Wrap yourself up in a quilt.
Yeah.
I have been. I've got like them on either side of me and in back of me, trying to stay warm while I'm sitting here.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Okay. Well, it's
Right.
nice finally meeting you in person, sort of.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, we will one day.
Yes.
hmm
Bye.
Okay. See ya.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.